If you're listening to this podcast, you know I love everything automotive. This passion has expanded to include being a car specialist consultant for RM Sotheby's. If you need assistance buying or consigning a collector car at any of our online or live auctions, including Scottsdale, Amelia Island, or Monterey, you can reach one of our car specialists at rmsotheby's.com, or you can email me directly at gstanley@rmsotheby's.com. I just want to give a quick thanks to Euro Classics for sponsoring this episode. Euro Classics is all about collector cars, from servicing your new BMW M5 to prepping that Porsche for the racetrack to executing a total restoration on your favorite classic. They do it all from routine maintenance to performance upgrades to appraisals and everything in between. You can learn more about its owner, Dale Oakes, by listening to episode number 35 of this podcast and his history with really rare Porsches. You can find Euro Classics in the Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana service area and online at euroclassics.com. That's Euroclassics, EUROCLASSIX.com.
This is the Collector Car Podcast, the home for the auto enthusiast. Join Greg Stanley as he applies over 25 years of insights and analytical experience to the collector car market. He will interview the experts and throw in some fun stuff as well.
Welcome to the Collector Car Podcast. Hey, it's Greg. I got a special guest today, RM Sotheby's president, Kenneth Ahn. Ken, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thanks for joining us today. I wanted to have you on because, as you know, it's been totally crazy in the collector car marketplace over the last 6-7 months now since COVID. And I know you've put in some really kind of deep dives, analytics on what you see out there in the marketplace. And I wanted to see if you could just kind of give us an overview from your perspective of the collector car marketplace as you see it today.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me on. Be happy to share some perspectives. Obviously, it's been a very interesting time. You know, I've only been with RM since 2016, and I'd say each one of the years have been very interesting for different reasons. But this one in particular, I have to admit, we didn't see it coming around the corner.
Sure.
Clearly, the classic car auction market is driven based on events, especially, you know, our business for the last several decades have been really optimized around holding auction events in major Concours d'Elegance or other important car events throughout the world. You know, up until March, you know, through Amelia Island, we were fine holding those events and everything was going as planned, if you will. And, you know, right after Amelia Island, news and the developments that were happening, particularly on the U.S. side, were changing so rapidly that we had to think very quickly. And, you know, it's been amazingly interesting and difficult times for all of us, but also an opportunity for us. I would say, you know, as a punchline, the market has clearly been impacted, not because the values have changed much, but because the ability to hold live auctions have gone down quite a bit.
Right, yeah, and I know some of the recaps you've done or some of the information I've seen, it was more about the number of cars that have been sold has gone down, so the sheer supply has gone down out there. But the actual data, the average value of the car, or whether it's the sell-through rates, those have been fairly consistent, haven't they?
Yeah, you know, one data point that I was looking at since we're in October now was, and the shutdowns really started happening in early March for us, that we looked at the last 6 months, so the 6 months during COVID shutdown versus the 6 months leading up to it, so from last September through this March. And the data points something very interesting. You know, for us at least, we offered 1,400 cars roughly between September and March. And since the COVID shutdowns in the last 6 months, we offered 946 cars. So clearly the volume has gone down a little bit, but we were able to make that up just by doing all online. Those were online sales. And you know, Palm Beach is a very interesting one for us and a memorable one, I think, for the RM team because we had just concluded the Amelia Island sale, which was very successful, very highly attended, you know, exceptional sell-through rates and the values achieved. And we came back from that weekend, and all of the news started to come out. You know, I remember walking around the Concours d'Elegance at Amelia Island thinking, what COVID?
Right.
You know, if you were there, you wouldn't be able to tell. But you know, when we came back to our offices the following week and started to see all the developments in news, you know, it was daunting. And we had our Palm Beach sale scheduled just the following week. So I guess it would be 2 weeks from the conclusion of Amelia Island. And as we were sitting there in our office on Wednesday, our team and the operations guys were setting up the tents, and the tents were going up on Wednesday in Palm Beach International Raceway. And, we had to make a decision very quickly, thinking that are we going to be able to hold a physical auction where we expect hundreds of people to come and gather? And we already had all of the cars consigned that were either en route or already arrived in Palm Beach. And so the decision we made at the time was to convert everything to online. At the time we thought if we can get half of our consigners to roll the dice with us, if you will, and that would be an incredibly successful sale. I think at the time they thought that there weren't many other alternatives either as the shutdowns were happening throughout the country. And they thought, why not try for it? And the results are spectacular. But what we learned from that and the sales from that point on was a very interesting fact, which was the fact that our clients were equally comfortable, it seemed to us, purchasing cars completely sight unseen versus going to the auction sites and physically inspecting the cars. Now, in order to do that, we, tried to think about what are the things that we can do for our clients, and if they were not on site, what would we typically walk them through? And we created a condition report template, and we provided those in addition to a significantly higher number of images and documents all available online. But the one data point that's very interesting is that during the 6 months leading up to COVID shutdowns for us, our average value per car sold was $151,000.
Right.
From Palm Beach on through September, our average value of cars we sold online only, without physical events, was $148,000, only $3,000 off.
Wow.
And to me, that's a very interesting statistics that people are comfortable paying just as much for cars that they cannot see.
Yeah, it's really amazing because I know you kind of talked about nobody flips a switch in moving a live auction to an online auction. I mean, I've seen it in numerous of the automobile magazines, how that was such a massive effort for everybody in 10 days, right? Can you talk a little bit about all the work that went into flipping the switch, so to speak?
Sure. I guess stepping back, in 2019, I had shared with our team that one of the future growth opportunities for us would be digital auctions. And we had started to leverage third-party platforms, develop our own, and started to work with Sotheby's, and I would say pilot test so that we can learn as we go. And so, in Q4 of 2019, we had done a handful of online-only auctions, and certainly once January, February, and March kicked in, we were so focused on executing our physical auctions that, I would say on a relative basis, it was getting a lot less attention. But we had sort of I would characterize as a strong beta test that had happened up until that point. And that's what enabled us to have the courage to say, you know what, it's not ready for prime time, but we have no option. At the time, the decision was much harder for us because we didn't know how long this was going to go for. Our operating model, when we think about executing our auction, it's not as simple as just having an auctioneer sell the car. Our operations, our client services, our administration team, our research team, even on-site execution, everything has been optimized for physical auctions. And so we sort of had to think about it with a clean sheet of paper, almost flip our business model upside down within a period of 10 days and say, okay, here's the situation, here's the cars we have, here's the platform that we had built, not quite ready for prime time, but what needs to get done between now and end of next week to execute the sale. And from that point on, I think we were working literally around the clock to execute this. And, I think looking back, it was absolutely the right decision. We had learned a ton from that experience and the post-sale experience. And I think with every sale that we do, we learn from our mistakes or areas that needs to be improved, and we continue to improve and change. Now it's almost like you forget how to do your physical auctions as we've retrained ourselves over the last 6 months.
Are there learnings from the competition that you've seen out there, like someone kind of trying to cut it a different way that you find interesting?
I would say there have been a handful of pure play digital players that's been out there and with a great success, albeit started at a smaller scale. They're continuing to grow. And, we were coming at it from a different perspective, sort of top-down physical versus, in terms of the market versus sort of the entry level of the market and digital. And that makes complete sense. But, when you decide to flip the switch, I guess there's a bit of a free riding where you look at what others are doing currently and trying to figure out what are the things that we want to adopt and what are the things that we want to try to do better. And I think we were the first ones of the major physical auction houses to convert to online and do so successfully over the last 6 months. And with that, I think we sort of created a benchmark for other players to look at ours and say, that's worked well for RM, and that probably hasn't worked well for RM, or here's some areas that we can develop. And so, it's I would say in this day and age, information flow as well as benchmarking and, to a certain degree free riding, but also to think about creative ways to continue to improve, it's created a whole new competitive dynamics. And, I think everyone's catching up very, very quickly.
Yeah, that's true. And I did want to point out that the average car was $148,000, but there were some big hitters in there. We had a couple $2 million Ferraris, correct? And even a record-setting $4 million Ferrari, correct, on one of our sales?
Yeah, no, I'll never forget that sale in May when we sold a 288 GTO, which sold for $2.3 million. And, at the time, based on our information that we have, that was the highest price achieved for a car sold at an online-only auction without physical presence. And, we thought that was very exciting. And then just a couple hours later, that record was broken by selling a 2003 Ferrari Enzo for $2.6 million, $2.64 to be exact. And again, that was all sight unseen based on photos and conversations with their car specialists. Obviously, they had to put a lot of effort in making sure that they described the cars correctly, et cetera. And then most recently in August, we had, in lieu of our traditional Monterey auction, which is by far the biggest auction that we hold in a calendar year, we did what we called a Shift Monterey, which was an online-only sale. And in that sale, we sold a 2001 Ferrari 550 GT1 Pro Drive for $4.29 million, which holds the record today.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, can you speak to a little bit about the, generational shift you're seeing, some of the trends you're seeing in the marketplace that you can see in the results at the auction?
Yeah, I think a couple things that stuck out. One was obviously the value that we discussed. The second thing is the average age of the buyers at our auction over the last 6 months is lower by almost 10 years, 9.3
Wow.
to be exact, versus the last year. And so I think that also goes hand in hand with the fact that we had this year so far an online platform, 40% of the buyers, or the ultimate buyers, were brand new to us. We've never interacted in the past. And so I think when you're looking at the fact that it's digitally driven, which obviously broadens the geographic scope and arguably also changes the demographics. The 40% of the new buyers who came to us, I think, are ultimately the ones that drove down the average age.
What have the results been when you look at your international buyers? Has that increased as well?
Yeah, I think overall the U.S. sales have certainly seen a lot more international participants. I think our European sales tend to be quite international to begin with, but on the U.S. side, we had a lot more international participants and from more countries. In fact, several countries where we didn't realize that there were collectors who were buying from us.
Wow. Okay. Wow, that's really cool. Well, I do want to dig into your passion for cars here in a second, but before I do, I wanted to find out, could you give us kind of what you see in the future for 2021 as it relates to the collector car market, and then specifically for RM Sotheby's?
Yeah, here's what I would say, Greg, about the collector car market. One man's view. The collector car market has shown that it is a cyclical market in any given short period of time. But over time, it's shown a very strong secular growth, a multi-decade growth that's significantly outpaced the global economy. And, I think there's always this argument that it's different this time. When you think about collector cars, in the 70s it was the oil prices, in the 80s it was interest rates and inflation. In the 90s it was, Japan or the slowdown from Japanese collectors. And all these various reasons for, when we think about those decades, were all touted as headwinds and future looks bleak for collector cars. But, I think outside the collector car world, I've learned over the years that, the concept of mean reversion trumps it's different this time sort of mentality most of the time and over time. And I don't think classic cars are any different. Despite how people talk about it's different this time because of online, it's different this time because of electric cars, autonomous driving, different regulations, I think when you take a step back, the core of what I believe drives the collector car market and the classic car market is really the passion and the desire to own a piece of automotive history. I think it touches various aspects of our emotion, human emotions, the joy of collecting and owning cars, the joy of driving or racing cars, the joy of having money invested in a tangible asset that hopefully appreciates over time, the joy of just looking at a car in your garage or your driveway. I mean, this weekend, I actually had my 2000 Mercedes E55 and 2002 G500 lined up side to side in my driveway and just admired it and looked at it while I was smoking a cigar.
Right.
There's something that as long as these cars touch, human emotions and they drive our passion, I think they will be important. It's no different than art, watches, wine, or other things which all appeal to different aspects of human emotions. And so I think the collector car and the passion will continue. It'll continue to evolve. I think where we're going to see probably more change is the speed and depth of information flow, right? And the channel through which transact. I mean, I was trying to talk to my friend the other day. Think about the stockbrokers in the 1980s. You see those Wall Street images of all the guys in shirts and ties on their phones. And then you think about the traders in the trading pits. In fact, my college roommate was a trader in the trading pit and then the New York Stock Exchange in the 2000s, right? I mean, those functions have really evolved, right? And technology has changed the way that works, but as a result of it, the speed and the access of information has grown exponentially. I'd also argue that the ease of transaction and cost to doing transaction has also improved exponentially. And I think that we're seeing that starting to happen in the collector car world. I mean, nowadays, you look up a VIN number, you Google a VIN number, or look up some of the auction results, you can pull a lot more information about a car than a collector was able to do 10, 20 years ago. And I think that will continue to create more information, smarter sort of price discovery, and a smarter collector base. And so, I don't know exactly how that's going to evolve, but I do know that, my bet would be that, as much as technology has rapidly changed the way collector cars have traded hands over the last 10 years, I'm certain that will change much faster in the next 10 years.
Right. And how do you see 2021? Is it back to the same old live auctions? Is it a hybrid? Is it unknown at this point?
Yeah, boy, I wish I had that crystal ball. Greg, I would say this. I think, when we had our live auction in Auburn Fall, and you were there, and when you talk to your clients and collectors and frankly, just our staff too. Everyone's dying to travel and go to these events again. It's about socializing. It's about seeing and smelling and hearing the different cars, and that's just obviously being challenged. So I would say in 2021, hopefully, with vaccine and other measures, that there'll be, I would think that there'd be gradual coming back of all these events, and that would create a very interesting scenario for us, which, this is probably one thing that keeps me up at night, which is we had done this sort of metamorphosis or, severe pivoting from pure sort of bricks and mortar live events to online over the last 6 months. But, our core business and the high end of the market and the collectors are really driven by live events. And so one of the things that we're spending a lot of time on right now, for which I have no crystal ball or clear answer, but what we're trying to figure out is what happens as things come back and where are we going to be focused. And I think the answer for us, at least for RM, would be a hybrid one. I think there's significant opportunity on the digital side of things. In fact, I'd argue that the saying that never waste a good crisis. I think for the fact that we wanted to try to advance our digital auction business, this probably accelerated by 2 or 3 years. On the flip side, our core business and where we drive our commercial outcome as well as all the relationship has always been on the major events. And so part of the job and part of where I spend most of my time today is thinking about our plans for next year, and what I am planning for is both coming back.
Right, and actually, if you would, speak to Auburn for a little bit. That was our first live in-person event post-COVID, during all this. Did you see it as successful, and why?
Yeah, I thought it was very successful. It depends on what metrics you're looking at. And Auburn has, tens of thousands. I mean, I think we get something like 30 to 40,000 people in attendance during that week in normal years. This year we had about 1,200 to maybe 1,500, and so it's a significantly scaled down auction, and also the overall environment was quite subdued. But part of that was because it was by design. We had limited attendees only to registered bidders, no other sort of general admissions, but only registered bidders and their guests. And we had removed as a cautionary measure a lot of the sort of social aspect of it, whether that's car corral or food vendors or swap meet that have been there for. In fact, this year was the 50th anniversary, so it's been there for a long time. But I think first and foremost was the concern for health for our clients as well as our staff. And so we had significantly reduced attendance and traffic. But considering that, the amount of remote bidding and online bidding more than compensated for that, where the results of the sale was actually, for us, it was about 40% higher than we thought we were going to achieve in Auburn. It was tremendous. In fact, beginning of the auction, I actually had to ask to swap out our operator for digital sort of internet bidding because there were just so much bidding coming in that the person was just not able to handle the volume. Never seen that kind of volume before. In fact, Auburn, Greg, was interesting because the overall results were good. The major collection consigners were very happy. But what was really surprising to me was close to 40% of total purchases by value were done online.
Wow.
and
Okay.
that was something that, I think it was up something like 3,000% from the last year, right? So it's just interesting to see. And I think that was an interesting hybrid model in the works, right? You had a lot of people that were there bidding in person, but you also had a lot of people who were bidding remotely.
Well, so what's next for RM Sotheby's? What's on the calendar?
We have a couple of sales coming up. The next big sale for us is in Elkhart, Indiana, the Elkhart collection. Due to COVID, we had extended and delayed that several times, but time has finally come, and we'll run it very much like we did with Auburn Fall. And then following that in November, we'll have our London sale, which at the moment, given the most recent announcements by the UK government, it looks like that'll be a digital-only auction again. So, again, an example of us going back and forth and running both models.
Well, I appreciate you giving us an overview of the state of the industry as you see it, as well as a peek into 2021. And like I said earlier, I would like to know more about your passion for cars. Now, if I got this correct, you're a former Harvard football player from the consulting world that's now president of a auction house. How did that happen?
Yeah, sometimes life just happens serendipitously. I could not have planned for it. So let me take a step back. My passion for cars started when I was probably around 5 years old. I literally tried to put my hands on every little mini cars that I could get my hand on and try to memorize the names and the year, make, and models, right, and try to identify them. And so, my passion for cars was, I would say, very different than sort of my friends and cousins. I immigrated to the U.S. in '92, and when I came to prior to coming to the U.S., all my passion for cars were cars that I saw on photos and books and mini cars, but I hardly saw any of them because I grew up in Korea, where it's a small country, the land of particularly small Hyundais, Daewoo's, and Kias, right?
No muscle cars.
And so, no muscle cars. So when I came to the U.S., I mean, that was, to me, that I was a kid in the candy store from that perspective, right? I was so excited by the fact that I couldn't identify 95% of the cars on the road, and so that's sort of going back to how my car passion started. And I guess growing up, and through college, I've spent most of my time. I think I subscribed to every major car magazine. My college roommates or friends would say that I was the car nut. I'm the guy that's constantly looking at other cars driving down on a road trip, right? But I never would have imagined, I was a management consultant after college. Then I went back to business school for my MBA degree. And then I worked as an investment banker focused on M&A on Wall Street. And, totally by fluke, when I decided that I didn't want to be a banker anymore once I grew up. One of the partners that I had worked at the investment bank became the chief financial officer of Sotheby's, and so I was not planning on changing my career and moving into Sotheby's. In fact, when I left Wall Street, I wanted to take a year off and try to figure out what I wanted to do, and actually bought a car at that time to try to, one of my favorite cars to drive, and I thought I'd enjoy for a little bit and take a little break. And next thing I know, I met with the management of Sotheby's, and I told them I had no idea. I didn't know anything about art or auctions, and they said it was perfect. And totally serendipitously, one of the first projects, in fact, the very first project that landed on my lap. In fact, the weekend before I started at Sotheby's, I got a brown UPS box delivered to my doorstep on Saturday, and I thought it was a wine basket. Sotheby's has a nice wine retail shop on York Avenue, and it was pretty heavy. I opened it up, and there were binders of this company called RM Auctions, and that's how I got to know RM and met with Rob Myers, the founder of the company. And I looked at it from a investor and a strategic partner standpoint. Even at that point, I had no idea that I'd be at RM and running the business a few years down the road.
Wow, that's really insane, and I got a ton of questions now. So what was that cool car you bought?
So it was a 911. So it's actually a modern 991 Carrera 2S, and I've always wanted a Porsche 911, and this is funny because this was one of my bosses that growing up the ranks on Wall Street, I always thought that I want to be like him one day, and he had this beautiful 997 Carrera 2S before, and knowing how much I loved Porsche and particularly that color of that car, he had actually offered it for me to buy at the same price that he was going to get as a trade-in.
Wow.
Our first child, our son, was just born. He was literally 1 month old. We were still living in New York City. This was a manual two-seat, and if I sit in the front row, there's no way a child seat goes into the back. And my wife and I had long discussions, but ultimately agreed that it was impractical for us, so I passed. And he went ahead and traded that in and bought a 991 when it came out. Then after a couple of years, he decided that he wanted to part ways, and that's exactly when I was leaving Goldman. And I said, you know what, I'll buy it. So that was the car I bought. I still have it today.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it sounds like you don't let cars go. Speaking of which, could you tell our listeners about your little, I think it's a Mercedes that's in the warehouse there at Auburn?
Yeah, it's actually a 95 Mercedes-Benz E320 sedan. For Mercedes follower, it's W124 chassis, arguably the most successful chassis for Mercedes, which means that collectability is super low. It was the last year, so it was a 95, and I mentioned to you that I came from Korea in middle school, and I think when I look back at my life, my passion for cars really started with my dad. I mean, he loved cars. And just to give you a sense, we would go on a West Coast road trip for 2 weeks, let's say, and we'd come home, and literally as we're unloading the car, my dad would kiss the hood of the car. And and I was a young kid, and he would say, the car is just like people. It eats, it consumes energy, it breathes air. It actually passes air, and it's that if you treat them well, that they'll love you back. And I'll never forget that when I was young. So my dad was coming from Korea. He always aspired to have a Mercedes-Benz. I think some of it's cultural probably, but Mercedes, in his mind and many of his friends' minds, were the pinnacle of automobiles. And so this was the first Mercedes he ever bought. And back in 2003, so we had the car for almost 8 years, 120,000 miles, car sitting in our driveway. Our family's been using it for a long time. But at this point, post-college, and I'm working at a consulting firm, and I'm just about to get shipped out to Asia. And my father says, let's just sell this car. No one's using it. And I said, no problem. Put it on classifieds and sell to a guy who is a very also a car passionate guy, and he has several Mercedes from 80s, 70s, and 90s, a few Volkswagens as well. And in fact, his first car was a Volkswagen Beetle, and he still had that. And he came and he fell in love with the car and said that he really wanted it, and he bought it. That was 2003. And in 2004, I suddenly lost my father to cancer. And, I didn't think much of it. Life was difficult. I was just, about to start business school. I postponed it for another year to help with family matters. And then, I mentioned to you, I got married in 2008 and had my son in 2009. And in 2009, right after my son was born, all of a sudden, and this was the depth of the recession, right? Not the time to be thinking about cars, but I thought, man, wouldn't it be cool if my son can ride in his grandfather's car that he never met his grandfather. And it's also a car that was, for me, it was the first Mercedes and the last family sedan that my dad ever had. And so I had, all of a sudden I got super excited and I started to look for this guy named Ron who bought the car from us. And, even with modern day, Google searches and everything else, it was very difficult to find. And I finally, some time after, found his contact information and contacted him, and lo and behold, he still had the car. In fact, when we sold it, it had 125,000 miles on it. Fast forward 10 years, he still has 145,000 miles on it, so he's put on 2,000 miles a year effectively, maybe 2,500 a year, and sent me photos, and it's exactly how we left it. And I got so excited, and over lunch I sat down with my wife, and my mom happened to be there, and told him about this grand plan of buying my dad's old Mercedes back. And, that went as far as a Scud missile getting hit by a Patriot missile. In fact, there were two Patriot missiles in my wife and my mom who looked at me and said, you're living in New York City, parking is $800 a month, you want to buy a 15-year-old Mercedes that's got six-figure mileage on it. It made no sense. And it's funny because to me it made perfect sense.
Right. Yeah, it does to all car guys.
Yeah, but ultimately, I thought about it and I thought, rationally it makes no sense. Emotionally it makes perfect sense, but rationally it doesn't. And I let it go. I called Ron again and I said, I'm really sorry that I went through all this, but I can't do it. It's just not the right time. And from that point on, Greg, for 3-4 years, I thought about that car all the time. And I felt like, oh, man, I wish I should have just bit the bullet and got it, put it in storage somewhere, because there's only one car. I can't just go buy another 95 E320. It's that car. About 3 years later, he actually called me and said, things have changed, and I've decided to pare down my collection and trade in a bunch of cars for a new pickup truck. And if you want the car, let me know. And when I got that email, I happened to be working in Edmonton on a deal, and the plan was that I had to go through Seattle that weekend on Friday to head back to New York. And so, it was almost fate. I said, hey, I'm going through Seattle. And he, lo and behold, he came and picked me up in the car. He's named the car Lily. And when he sold the car, his only condition was that I continue to call the car Lily and send him a photo once in a while. So I still call her Lily, and she's sitting in our Indiana facility.
That's a great story. That's an amazing story. So that was a car that was on your list for many years. Is there a dream car on your list right now?
Oh, boy. So many, but recently I had a car that I wanted, and I don't know what it is. Different people have different angles for collecting. For me, whether it's my dad's car or my old boss's 911, I really like something about cars that were owned by people that I know, or people who I admired. And again, this is a case of not any car, but the particular car. And the old boss that I had at Goldman Sachs, and the one that was CFO at Sotheby's, he happened to, when we were doing the RM deal, was very interested in purchasing a Ferrari, and he ended up buying a 2007 599 GTB. And I remember getting all excited and looking for those cars with him. I think it was our Arizona sale, or RM's Arizona sale. We were at Sotheby's at the time, and when we went to go visit, we went to a Ferrari dealership out in Scottsdale, or Phoenix or Scottsdale, and test drove one of them and looked at them. And I think, in fact, if I recall correctly, I think I found this particular car on my iPad on a flight with him that was sitting in Long Island, and he ended up buying that car. That was always my next car that I aspired. And as luck would have it, about 2 months ago, he decided to move and change things and sell the 599. You know, as a one that I would say there's never a good time to buy a car. I would say
Right.
especially in this market. But I thought, you know what, there's only one time that would come. So I guess I have what was on my list of dream cars. I guess the next one will have to be something of Rob Myers, but I don't know what that would be.
Yeah. Now, what color's the car?
It's Argento Nürburgring. So it's a silver with a charcoal interior.
Oh, that's a nice combo. Okay, cool. Well, awesome, man. Well, one thing I like to do at the end of this is to play a little game I call Keep, Cash, and Crush. I did give you a heads up about this, but not what cars I'm picking, okay?
Uh-oh. Yep, I think I'm ready.
Well, I decided to pick 3 cars from the Elkhart collection.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's, over 200 cars in the auction coming up in a couple of weeks?
It's very exciting sale, yeah.
Yeah, so I picked a few, and you've mentioned Mercedes a few times during our call. And the other 2 I picked you have not mentioned, so I hope it's not a clear winner here. But let's see. The first car is that Mercedes 1953 300S Roadster Custom. Mm-hmm. Now this is I think what was it, like a light yellow with a green interior, and it has the aftermarket engine, so it's really made for or an updated engine, right?
Ironically, that has the M104 engine, which is the same engine that's in my dad's Mercedes.
I don't know if that's good or bad. So. All right, the next one is the 64 Aston Martin DB5, a beautiful blue color. And then the third one is a little bit of a curveball, is a 57 Jaguar XKSS continuation car. Oh. So you've got the 53 Mercedes, the 64 Aston Martin, the 57 Jag. Which one would you keep forever? Which one would you cash in? And which one would you send to the crusher?
Ooh. Keep, cash, or crush. Let me give it a little bit of thought here. Okay. Oh, well, it's tough. Let's start with the crush, because I think I can probably eliminate the one that I would like to have the least. For me personally, I think the 53, the 300S Roadster Custom, as much as I love Mercedes and it's a great looking car, you know, for me personally, if I own a car of that vintage and that particular car, I think I would probably want the old original engine or the right type of it. And now that's not to say that I can't go and do that, but I would say of the 3, that's probably the least that I would. So I would probably crush that one.
That's surprising, because I just thought Mercedes. You said Mercedes like 3 times prior, so that's impressive. Yeah. Okay, so that's the crush.
Yeah, it's trust me, it's not easy. Oh boy, you know, I would say. Well, the part of the challenge, Greg, is that I'm also a big guy, so some of these cars I got to test drive and make sure I can drive them if I want to keep them. But
make sure you fit in them, yeah.
Yeah, I would say this. I would say I would cash in on the XKSS continuation car, and I would keep the DB5. It's a tough one. XKSS, beautiful car. You know, I think it's tough because that's also road going, right? And there's, but I'd say, you know, it's probably a personal taste. I think if I had an original XKSS and then have this one as my sort of rally car or race car, I think that would be amazing. But if I only had one XKSS, I'd probably, if I could afford it, could have the original, not the continuation from Jag Classic. So I think the values, and there's certainly a market for it. I think it's a beautiful car. I think, as I mentioned, there are probably collectors who own XKSS who would own a continuation, or there may be others who would prefer that, especially at the prices that these have relative to the original one. So I think that would bring good value. So I would say I would cash that, and then I'd keep the DB5. I think that's that's a very original car, and it looks amazing. At least I haven't looked at it closely in person, but the color and just the configuration, something about right-hand drive also. I never had a right-hand drive or driven a right-hand drive in a manual format before, to be honest, but that one intrigues me.
Okay. No, that's fair. Okay, so you're going to keep the Aston Martin. You're going to cash in the Jag, which does have the highest estimate, so financially that was the best decision. Yeah. And then the unoriginal Mercedes is the one you're going to crush.
Yeah, and I'll pocket that money to buy my other old boss's cars.
There you go. Just keep on buying them. Keep on buying them.
Well, I think I've regretted every car that I bought for collecting purposes that I've sold.
There's a lesson there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks so much for your time today, Ken.
All right, thanks for your time, Greg. This is great.
Thanks for listening to the Collector Car Podcast. Don't forget to give us a nice rating on iTunes and be sure to follow us on Instagram and everywhere else at the Collector Car Podcast.